Hello everyone, Books with Banks back again, and this video marks the beginning of a new series of mine, Genocide in Sci-Fi and Fantasy. Before going too far, it would mean a lot if you haven't already, if you could please like and subscribe. Alright, so what am I aiming to do with this series? Well, when I was in school, I studied genocide. And so while it is a term that might get thrown around a lot, I'm confident it's not always used in the most appropriate of situations. So I would like to go through works in our favorite genre across film, television, books, and even in video games where the term genocide is used and or when genocides are depicted. I don't want genocide to be a buzzword because even though the atrocities I'll be looking at are fictional, they often reflect some real-world terrifying genocidal actions, plans, and horrors. So we need to be very respectful here and not just throw such a heavy term around to refer to things like mass murder or other forms of oppression. I should also be clear here that if I ever determine in this series that something is, or that I personally am not labeling something a genocide, my conclusion should in no way be interpreted to mean that these events therefore aren't as bad because they're not a genocide. It's not like genocides are the worst and a victim group needs to have suffered the most to get the label of genocide. We're not doing anything like that here. Please, I hope no one's getting that takeaway. We're not saying, well, this group had it worse than that group. Nothing like that. No. Just because something isn't a genocide doesn't mean it's less atrocious necessarily. All that said, I want to start this series out with a brief example from a very popular film franchise, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In the epic two-part climax of films, being Infinity War and then Endgame, the character Thanos is the villain. Over several of the preceding films, he's been collecting the Infinity Stones to try and have the ultimate power in the universe, the power to do anything with the snap of his fingers. Thanos plans to use this power to wipe out exactly 50% of life in the universe. In his mind, this twisted idea will solve resource scarcity issues, environmental destruction issues, and a whole swathe of problems plaguing many overpopulated planets in addition to Earth. Of course, our heroes, the Avengers, are out to stop him. Near the end of the film, Infinity War, Doctor Strange, one of the Avengers, he's conversing with Thanos about a planet called Titan, where Thanos basically did a test run, a trial run of his population mass murder control scheme. This is the conversation. Thanos says, Titan was like most planets. Too many mouths, not enough to go around, and when we faced extinction, I offered a solution. Doctor Strange replies, genocide. Then Thanos, at random, dispassionate, fair to rich and poor alike. So, very quick scene. And I can attach a link to a clip of that if you want to watch the scene itself for yourself on YouTube. I can put that in the description below. But Doctor Strange calls this genocide, and I would argue he's wrong. Actually, the most important aspect of this conversation isn't even that Strange mislabels this mass murder, but rather Thanos' follow-up. Thanos doesn't come right out and say that he's refuting Strange's label, but in effect, that's what he does. If Thanos' slaughter was, in fact, as he says, dispassionate, at random, and fair to all, then I don't think we can call it a genocide. Again, it's still horrible and monstrous to kill so many people. I don't want to take away from that, but I do want to stress how reckless Strange is being throwing around a term like genocide without really considering the broader implications of that term. Am I nitpicking a little bit here? Maybe, but it is to make a point, and it is to kind of kick this series off. So, genocide. The word genocide shouldn't just refer to any situation in which millions or billions of people are murdered. Genocide is a much more complicated and specific type of atrocity with clear definitions and particularities worth studying and paying attention to as they set this type of atrocity apart from others. So if genocide isn't just mass murder, you might be asking, what is it? What's a better definition? For this, let's look at Raphael Lemkin, who first coined the term genocide, and let's see how he would have defined it. Lemkin was a Polish lawyer, and he lived and worked in the first half of the 20th century. The term he used, genocide, was actually first applied to an analysis of the Armenian genocide, predating the more infamous and widely recognized Holocaust by about 25 years. And that's only talking about the most recent killing and deportations of Armenians. We could go down a whole rabbit hole with just an analysis of exactly what happened with the Armenian genocide. Anyway, in chapter 1 of this book, the Oxford Handbook of Genocide Studies, A. Dirk Moses, a professor at the University of Sydney at the time he wrote this chapter, Moses goes through the early foundation of this idea of genocide and what genocide studies actually is. Moses acknowledges the lack of intellectual discourse on an analysis of Raphael Lemkin's earliest definitions, but Moses tries to present a more comprehensive interpretation to serve, in effect, as a foundation for the rest of this handbook. He quotes Lemkin as writing, quote, "Genocide has two phases. One, destruction of the national pattern of the oppressed group. The other, the imposition of the national pattern of the oppressor. This imposition, in turn, may be made upon the oppressed population, which is allowed to remain, or upon the territory alone, after removal of the population and the colonization of the area by the oppressor's own nationals." A lot to unpack here, especially as it pertains to the Thanos and Doctor Strange conversation. First of all, Lemkin uses the words destruction and national pattern. I think I can safely simplify this to say what we kind of phrase we might be more familiar with, destruction of the culture of the oppressed group, and that might make this a bit clearer. So if this is a constant with genocide, this destruction of culture, what cultures and what oppressed groups is Thanos targeting? Furthermore, Lemkin explains that the second part of any genocide comes with the colonization of the area by the oppressor group. It seems that in the MCU adaptations of the comics, Josh Brolin's Thanos had no intention of instituting his own culture in place of any he destroyed, nor does it seem that he was specifically targeting any cultures. Therefore, I think we can say with certainty that A, Doctor Strange didn't exactly know what he was talking about when he called this genocide, and B, while Strange doesn't explain that his following statement is a rebuttal, I think we can confirm that it in fact is. That it is just that. Thanos is explaining why Doctor Strange is wrong, if not in so many words. So that's mostly what I wanted to say on the point of why Doctor Strange is wrong, and why even though Thanos is still a monster, it would be incorrect to characterize his actions as genocidal, and even Thanos understands this. I don't want to end the video here just yet though, because this being my first video in the series, I'd like to continue to explain a few of the oddities with Raphael Lemkin's earliest ideas on genocide, just so that moving forward, we understand these foundations a little bit more. So in that same chapter, chapter 1 I just mentioned from Oxford Handbook of Genocide Studies, Moses, he explains that Lemkin was a proponent of this groupism school of thought, believing that groups of people can be studied as agents and active entities affecting the history of the world. Lemkin explained that the human cosmos consisted of 4 groups: racial, national, religious, and ethnic, and any one of these groups could be the target of genocide. Now, where this can get a little sticky, a little tricky, later is in how nuanced many actual cultural groups are. There might be genocides that don't strictly adhere to any one or combination of those 4 groups, or they're not targeting any one of those groups, but some strange evolving combination of those groups. There might be genocides in which one of those 4 groups breaks down within itself. A lot of different scenarios can unfold. But by and large, I think we can see where Lemkin was going with this. All 4 groups he mentions have a positive impact on bettering the human race, contributing to culture in meaningful ways, and if any of those groups are ever victimized, this should be taken seriously and stopped by international forces. So any genocide should be seen as a threat to more inclusive, diverse, progressive societies. So while this groupist and collectivist kind of framework can feel a bit like robbing individuals of their own status as victims, survivors, cultural practitioners, etc., Lemkin's method can be helpful from an analytical standpoint, especially when governments need to be convinced of how threatening international atrocities are, and they need a more simplified narrative of the situation to be convinced to intervene. Moses also points out that Lemkin's Classic examples of genocide all involve an imperial power colonizing a weaker region or people. I think just sitting here now with very little research or deep thinking, we can all make that logical link between imperialism and genocide, especially as I've now explained the origins of the term as destruction of culture and explain how this doesn't need to mean the complete annihilation of a group of people or any of those maybe more common misunderstandings. But I think, and it seems Moses would also argue, that this link between imperialism and genocide should be taken as a common occurrence, but not necessarily a rule, maybe as a sort of square and rectangle situation where every square is a rectangle, but not the other way around. I think we can safely say every imperial and colonial attempt and conflict has an element of genocide, but not necessarily every genocide is part of colonialism or imperialism. In fact, in my next video, we will be looking at an instance in a video game franchise in which imperialism played only a very small part, if any. But please look out for that video in the next week or two, somewhere in there. I hope it doesn't seem like I'm treating such a sensitive topic flippantly by approaching it through the lens of fantasy and sci-fi science fiction. If anything, I hope this is an example of how much thought and conversation one quick moment of dialogue can inspire in our favorite genre. I ask that everyone keep the comment section a civil place, although my usual commenters are all brilliant and thoughtful anyway, so I'm sure that won't really be a problem. But yeah, anyway, all that said, thank you all so much for watching. Have a great day, and keep your eyes out for part 2 of the series, especially if you're a fan of the Mass Effect video game franchise. Thank you so much. Bye.